Ever stop and really listen to the sounds animals make? That bark, that whinny, that oink. I mean, can we truly know what they're feeling just from those noises?
It's a great question. And figuring out whether an emotion is, good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, what scientists call emotional valence, well, that's absolutely key to their well-being.
Exactly. And that's why today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty cutting edge. A new way of trying to understand exactly that.
It's a fascinating area, definitely. And surprisingly tricky, too. We can often tell if an animal is, agitated or calm their arousal level.
Right. High energy or low energy.
Yeah, but knowing if they're actually experiencing something positive like joy or negative like fear, that's historically been a real challenge for researchers.
Which leads us perfectly into the main subject for this deep dive. This really innovative scientific study I came across. Researchers used machine learning artificial intelligence to predict the emotional tone, the valence of sounds from 7 different ungulate species.
Ungulates, so hoofed animals.
Exactly. We're talking cows, sheep, horses, Przewalski's horses, the wild ones, pigs, wild boars, and goats. A real mix. And get this, the computer model they built could tell if the calls were generally positive or negative with, frankly, remarkable accuracy.
That is impressive. And what kind of sounds were they analyzing? Because animals make all sorts of noises.
Good point. They specifically focused on contact calls. The sounds animals use to sort of check in with each other, stay connected with their group.
Okay. So by sticking to one type of call, they're trying to sort of minimize the effect of the sound's basic function, like I'm over here versus danger.
Precisely. The idea was to make it more likely that any acoustic patterns they found were actually linked to the underlying emotion, not just the situation.
Clever. Controls for one big variable.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack how this machine learning approach actually works, what it revealed about the emotional life of these animals, and some of it is genuinely surprising, and what the implications might be, which could be pretty big, actually.
Sounds great. Where should we start? Maybe why it's been so hard to measure this valence thing in the first place.
Yeah, let's do that. So you mentioned arousal is easier to spot. Why has pinning down whether the feeling is good or bad been such a puzzle?
Well, like you said, we can often see arousal and animal pacing, heart rate increase, maybe sweating. That tells us about the intensity of their state.
Okay.
But is that intensity because they're excited about getting food, which is positive?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it because they're terrified of a predator, which is obviously negative? That's the valence question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just much harder to measure objectively. We can't, just ask them how their day is going.
Uh-huh. If only. Yeah, we usually rely on interpreting their behavior, but that can be subjective, can't it? Like you mentioned, a cat purring could be happy, could be stressed.
Exactly. It's not always straightforward. So the idea of using vocalizations is really appealing because the way sounds are produced is directly linked to physiology. Well, when an animal feels an emotion, it causes physiological changes. Think about your own voice when you're scared versus happy. Changes happen in the muscles controlling the vocal cords, breathing patterns shift.
Ah, I see.
And these physiological shifts subtly alter the acoustic characteristics of the sounds produced. Things like pitch, how long the call is, the quality or timbre of the sound.
So the hope is that by analyzing these specific sound features, we can find reliable clues to the underlying emotional state, like an acoustic fingerprint for feelings.
That's the hypothesis, yes, that specific emotions might leave consistent acoustic signatures.
Interesting. Okay, so these researchers took this idea and applied some pretty advanced tech. They gathered a big data set of these contact calls,
Where the emotional context, positive or negative, had already been carefully validated using behavioral cues. That validation part is crucial.
Right, so they knew baseline whether the animal was likely feeling good or bad in that moment. And then they unleashed this machine learning tool, XGBoost. Sounds intense.
It does. Extreme gradient boosting. It's a very powerful type of AI. You can think of it like a highly efficient learning machine. It builds lots and lots of simple decision trees one after another, with each new tree trying to fix the mistakes the previous ones made.
Okay, so it learns from examples.
Exactly. They fed it loads of acoustic data measurements of pitch, loudness variation, duration, all sorts of things from the calls alongside the known emotional label, positive or negative. And the algorithm learned to associate specific acoustic patterns with each emotional state.
And the result, you said it was accurate. How accurate are we talking?
Well, This is one of the really striking findings. The overall accuracy across all 7 species combined was 89.49%.
Wow, almost 90%. That's huge.
It really is. And importantly, they also looked at balanced accuracy, which came in at 83.90%. That tells you the model wasn't just getting good at predicting, say, negative calls because there are more of them. It was performing well on both positive and negative classifications.
That's incredible. Nearly 90% accuracy in telling if a cow's moo or a pig's oink is, generally speaking, happy or sad, just from the sound.
Pretty much. Considering the diversity of the animals and just how complex emotion is, that's a remarkably high figure.
Absolutely. So the big question then is, what was the algorithm actually listening for? What specific sound features turned out to be the most important clues for telling positive from negative?
Right, this is where it gets really fascinating. The algorithm identified a core set of acoustic features that were consistently important predictors across most or even all of the species studied.
Okay, let's hear them. What are the sonic tells?
One that popped up consistently was something called the interquartile range of amplitude modulation depth.
Okay, break that down for us. Amplitude modulation.
Think of it like the wobble, or variation in the loudness of the sound over time. Is it a steady volume, or does it pulse up and down a lot? The interquartile range measures how spread out that variation is.
Got it. So how much the loudness wavers? What else?
Simple call duration, just how long the sound lasted, was also really important.
Makes sense.
Then there were features related to the distribution of sound energy, specifically the 25th percentile of energy quartiles and the interquartile range of the 75th percentile for the voiced parts of the call.
Whoa, okay, energy quartiles. What does that relate to? Like the richness or frequency content?
Exactly. It's about where the sound energy lies in the frequency spectrum. Is it concentrated in lower frequencies, making it sound deeper or more resonant? Or spread into higher frequencies, making it sound brighter or maybe harsher? These features capture that aspect of the sound's texture.
So the algorithm is paying attention to loudness, variation, duration, and the overall frequency profile or tone color of the sound? Were there other key features that showed up often?
Yes, several others were influential across 6 of the 7 species. These included the median amplitude modulation depth, sort of the average amount of loudness wobble, and also the speed of that wobble, the median frequency of amplitude modulation. Also, the median fundamental frequency, which is basically the main pitch you hear and how much that pitch changed over time, the median frequency modulation.
Okay, so pitch and pitch changes.
Yep. And finally, measures of acoustic roughness, how noisy or irregular the sound wave is, and something called the spectral centroid.
Spectral centroid again. Sounds like something from Star Trek.
Huh? It does, doesn't it? Think of it as the center of gravity for the sound's frequencies. If a sound has lots of low frequencies and some high ones, the spectral centroid tells you whether the overall balance leans low or high.
Okay, so it's like the average frequency brightness of the sound. And this balance seems to matter for emotion.
It seems so, yes. That balance point shifts depending on the emotional state.
So taking all these features together, loudness, wobble, duration, pitch, energy distribution, did the study find any general rules? Like, did positive calls consistently sound different from negative ones across the board?
Yes, and this is perhaps the most intriguing part. There were some definite trends. Generally speaking, the analysis suggested that positive calls tended to have less variation in loudness, a steadier volume.
Okay.
They also tended to have a more stable pitch, so less frequency modulation. Less energy seemed to be concentrated in the higher frequencies. And often, they were shorter in duration compared to the negative calls.
Ah, okay. So maybe a shorter, steadier, relatively lower pitched sound might lean positive, while a longer, more wavering sound, maybe with more high-frequency energy, might lean negative.
That seems to be the general pattern emerging from this data, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting hint at potentially shared, maybe even universal acoustic ways of expressing basic positive versus negative states.
A universal emotional sound code. But wait, you said the accuracy varied between species earlier, right? So it can't be completely universal.
Exactly right. While the overall model covering all 7 species was impressive, they also built separate models for each species individually. And the accuracy there definitely varied.
How much variation?
Quite a bit, actually. Pigs were the standout. The model for pig calls achieved an accuracy of 99.91%.
Whoa! Almost perfect.
Incredible, isn't it? It suggests their positive and negative grunts, or whatever calls they used, are acoustically very distinct. Horses, on the other hand, had a lower accuracy, around 81.38%. Still good, much better than chance, but clearly not as distinct as the pigs.
That is a big difference. What could explain why some species seem to speak their emotions more clearly through sound than others? Did the study offer any clues?
It did offer some potential insights, particularly through a visualization technique called UMAP. It's a way to map complex, high-dimensional data onto a simple 2D plot so you can visually see which sounds cluster together.
Okay, what did the UMAP plot show?
Well, for horses and the Przalski's horses, their calls formed distinct clusters, separate from the other species. Within those horse clusters, positive and negative calls were reasonably well separated, but maybe their longer, more complex whinnies make the distinction slightly less sharp than for, say, pigs.
Interesting. What about the pigs?
The pig calls formed multiple, quite scattered clusters on the plot, but these clusters strongly corresponded to either positive or negative valence. This might relate to them using different types of grunts, maybe short ones for one state, longer ones for another, leading to very clear separation.
And the others? Goats, sheep.
Goats were kind of the opposite. Their calls formed quite indistinct, overlapping clusters, suggesting their positive and negative sounds might be acoustically much more similar, harder to tell apart just by listening. Sheep were somewhere in the middle, separate from others, but with only moderate separation between positive and negative calls.
So it seems like while there might be these common acoustic ingredients for expressing emotion, like pitch stability or duration, the way each species combines those ingredients into their specific vocal recipes can be quite different.
That's a really good analogy. And other analyses they did, like k-means clustering on those UMA plots, basically confirm this. Pigs showed the clearest separation of emotional valence in their calls, while others, like goats, showed much less.
This is all absolutely fascinating stuff. So stepping back, what are the really big implications here? What does this kind of research mean for us, for the animals?
I think the potential implications are huge, especially for animal welfare. This kind of work really opens the door to developing automated systems. Imagine technology that could listen to farm animals or animals in zoos or labs and provide real-time feedback on their likely emotional state.
Like an emotional well-being monitor.
Exactly. Instead of relying solely on infrequent human observation, you could have systems constantly monitoring vocal cues for signs of distress or even contentment. It could allow for much earlier interventions and generally better, more tailored care.
That's an incredible prospect, having an objective ear listening out for how they're feeling.
Precisely. And beyond the direct welfare applications, this research also adds pieces to the puzzle of emotional evolution. Finding these shared acoustic features across quite diverse mammals, well, it suggests these ways of expressing emotion might have very deep evolutionary roots.
So it could tell us something about where our own emotional communication came from.
Potentially, yes. It feeds into that larger question about the evolution of communication, maybe even language. But of course, the researchers are clear, this is still early days. There are limitations.
Right. What did they flag as needing more work?
Well, obviously, 7 ungulate species is a fantastic start, but it's still a relatively small slice of the animal kingdom. Expanding this to more species, different types of animals, birds, primates, etc., is a clear next step.
More data needed.
Always. And also more diverse emotional contexts. This study focused on broadly positive versus negative situations, but emotions are more nuanced than that. Future work could try to distinguish between, say, fear versus frustration, or calm contentment versus playful excitement.
Getting more granular.
Exactly. They also noted the importance of really well-balanced data sets. For instance, in their cow data, there was a slight overrepresentation of negative calls. It didn't seem to skew the results badly, but ideally you want equal amounts of positive and negative examples for the AI to learn from effectively.
Makes sense. So more data, more species, more contexts, and careful data balancing. It sounds like a call for more collaborative research efforts.
Very much so. Building these large validated data sets is a big undertaking. But this study provides a really strong proof of concept, showing just how powerful this machine learning approach can be for, tuning into the emotional lives of animals.
Okay, so let's try and quickly sum up what we've covered in this deep dive. We've seen how machine learning, specifically this XGBoost algorithm, can analyze animal sounds, contact calls in this case, and classify their emotional valence, positive or negative, with really quite startling accuracy, almost 90% overall for these 7 hoofed species.
Right. And while there seem to be some shared acoustic clues across these species, things like call duration, pitch stability, loudness variation, suggesting maybe some fundamental ways mammals express emotion vocally.
There are also clear species-specific differences. Pigs, for example, seem to have very distinct happy versus unhappy sounds, while for goats, it's much harder to tell from the acoustics alone.
Exactly. And the really exciting takeaway is the potential this unlocks for automated animal welfare monitoring, having technology help us listen better and understand the emotional states of animals under our care.
It really does feel like a potential game changer for welfare, and maybe even for understanding the roots of emotion and communication more broadly.
Indeed, it's a significant step, offering a new window into their world.
It's certainly given me a new appreciation for just listening to animal sounds. So here's something to maybe ponder for you, our listener. If we can identify these basic acoustic markers of positive and negative feelings across different kinds of animals, what does that really tell us about the fundamental nature of emotion itself? Could there be core emotional experiences that truly transcend species boundaries? And perhaps more importantly, what responsibility does this growing knowledge give us to better recognize, understand, and respond to the emotional lives of the countless non-human animals we share the planet with? Maybe, just maybe, the key to a deeper connection lies not just in watching, but in truly listening.